After I refused to give my mom my inheritance, she ambushed me with lawyers. But when they handed me the papers, I smiled and said, "Funny, I brought someone too." They had lawyers waiting when I walked into the family meeting at my mother's house in Naperville, Illinois, 3 months and 4 days after my grandmother Eleanor Chen died and left me everything. Her house at 847 Oakwood Drive valued at $520,000, her savings account with $327,000 that she'd built over 43 years of teaching piano lessons and clipping coupons and refusing to let my mother borrow another cent, and all of it bypassing the people who'd spent the last decade treating her like an ATM that occasionally needed maintenance. My mother Rita sat at the head of the dining room table under the chandelier she'd bought with Grandma's money 3 Christmases ago when she'd guilted the old woman into helping out during a rough year that turned out to be a cruise to the Bahamas. Her arms crossed over her chest in that posture she uses when she's already decided she's right and you're just there to sign the paperwork confirming it. My brother Derek leaned back in his chair with that smirk he's perfected since high school when he learned he could charm his way out of consequences. One leg crossed over the other, looking at me like I was a problem he'd already solved in his head, and flanking them like hired muscle in an organized crime movie were 2 men in charcoal suits with briefcases open on the polished table, papers spread out in neat stacks that probably cost $400 an hour to prepare, their faces wearing that professional neutrality lawyers use when they're about to tell you something is for your own good right before they take everything you have. "Sit down, Michael," my mother said, and it wasn't a request or even a suggestion. It was an order delivered in the same tone she'd used when I was 7 and had tracked mud on her carpet, when I was 15 and had forgotten to take out the trash, when I was 23 and had told her I wasn't lending her money from my first real paycheck. "I'm Michael Chen, 29 years old, youngest of 2 children, the one who took calculus in high school and got a degree in accounting from Northern Illinois University, and now works at a mid-sized firm downtown doing tax preparation for small businesses. And more importantly, the one who actually showed up for Grandma Eleanor when she needed someone to drive her to oncology appointments at 6 a.m. on Tuesdays and hold her hand while poison dripped into her veins, trying to kill the cancer that was killing her faster. 3 months ago, January 18th, 2024, at 3:47 a.m., according to the hospice nurse's notes I still have in a folder in my apartment, Grandma died in her bedroom with me sitting in the chair beside her bed because I'd been staying over every night that last week, sleeping in 2-hour shifts, waking when her breathing changed, knowing the end was close but not how close, until it arrived with a quiet exhale that sounded like relief. The will reading happened 11 days later in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and old coffee, and when attorney Marcus Webb read the part that said, "I leave my entire estate to my grandson Michael Chen, who has shown me more love in the last 5 years than anyone else has shown me in 50. My mother's face went from composed to white to red in about 15 seconds, and Derek had actually laughed, this short, disbelieving bark, before saying, "She was kidding, right? She had to be kidding." But Grandma Eleanor hadn't been kidding. She'd been lucid and specific and had apparently anticipated exactly this reaction, because attorney Webb had then produced a letter she'd written in her own shaky handwriting that said simply, "They'll try to take it. Don't let them. You earned every penny by being present." Grandma, my mother got nothing. Derek got nothing. And for 3 months they'd been calling, texting, showing up at my apartment, trying guilt and anger, and finally this, the ambush meeting I'd agreed to attend because Mom had said, "We need to talk about Grandma's estate as a family." And I'd foolishly thought maybe, possibly, they'd finally accepted reality. Instead, I walked into a legal intervention designed to separate me from the inheritance they believed they deserved, simply by virtue of existing and being related to a woman they'd ignored for years. "We need to talk about Grandma's will," Mom began, her voice taking on that reasonable tone she uses when she's about to say something completely unreasonable. "There's obviously been a misunderstanding about her intentions. The dining room was too warm, the heat turned up to that level she prefers that makes everyone slightly uncomfortable and more willing to agree just to leave. Through the window behind her, I could see the driveway where Derek's BMW sat next to Mom's Lexus, both less than 2 years old, both purchased during years when they'd claimed to be struggling while asking Grandma for help. The chandelier light reflected off the papers on the table, and I could see letterhead that said, "Morrison and Associates, Estate Law." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, still standing because I hadn't been invited to sit so much as ordered, and I was discovering a spine I didn't know I had until 3 months ago when I'd started having to defend a dead woman's wishes to her living children. Grandma's will is clear. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed properly. Attorney Webb confirmed everything was legally sound. Derek leaned forward, uncrossing his legs, his smirk shifting into something that was supposed to look like concern but came across loss as condescension. Don't be selfish, Mike. That money belongs to the family. You can't just hoard it all because you happen to be the one with free time to play caretaker. The word play hit like a slap, like the 2 years I'd spent rearranging my schedule and using vacation days and sick days and unpaid days to drive Grandma to appointments and pick up prescriptions and sit with her through chemo sessions where she threw up until there was nothing left, was some kind of hobby I'd picked up for fun. Grandma disagreed, I said, keeping my voice level, because the moment I showed emotion was the moment they'd call me irrational. She made her choice. It's not up for negotiation. Mom's smile tightened at the edges, the way skin pulls around a wound. Which is why we're here, to fix her mistake. She gestured to the first lawyer, a man in his 50s with silver hair and glasses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He slid a stack of papers across the table toward the empty chair they'd clearly designated as mine, the pages crisp and official looking with tabs marking where I was supposed to sign my life away. This is a family equalization agreement, he said in a voice so smooth it could have been used to sell luxury cars or timeshares. It redistributes the inheritance fairly among all heirs according to standard interstate succession laws, which would have applied if your grandmother hadn't left a will. Essentially, it corrects the imbalance and ensures everyone receives their rightful share. His use of rightful was particularly galling, as if rights had anything to do with showing up to someone's deathbed after ignoring their life. I didn't touch the papers, didn't even look down at them. Fair? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I'd intended, but not harsher than I felt. Where were you when she needed rides to her oncology appointments every Tuesday at 6 a.m. for 8 months? Where were you when she couldn't afford her medication and was choosing between eating and treating her cancer? Where were you when she was sitting in that house alone on Christmas because you were too busy with your own families? The questions hung in the air like accusations, because that's exactly what they were. We were busy, Mom snapped, the reasonable tone cracking to show the anger underneath. We had careers, obligations, lives. You had nothing else going on. You were free. The implication being that my life, my job, my friends, my existence was somehow less valuable than theirs, that I'd been volunteered by virtue of being the least important person in the family hierarchy. My jaw clenched hard enough that I felt my teeth grinding. The second lawyer, younger than the first, maybe late 30s, with the kind of eager energy that suggested he was trying to make partner, cleared his throat and spoke up. Mr. Chen, we need to address the elephant in the room. Your grandmother was clearly suffering from diminished mental capacity when she wrote this will. We have medical records indicating she was perfectly clear, I cut in, my voice louder than I'd intended, echoing slightly in the too warm dining room. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had her doctor evaluate her mental state specifically to prevent this kind of challenge. She scored perfectly on every cognitive test they gave her 2 months before she died. Mom stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like a warning. Her voice went sharp, cutting through the pretense of civility we'd been maintaining. Sign the papers, Michael. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. This is family. We don't air our problems in court. Or what? I asked, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how steady, when inside I felt like I was standing on the edge of something that would either break me or make me stronger than I'd ever been. Derek's grin widened, and I saw in it the same expression he'd worn in high school when he'd convinced our parents that the dent in Mom's car was from a parking lot hit and run, and not from him backing into a mailbox while drunk. Or we contest the will. We tie it up in probate court for years. We drag this through the legal system until you've spent everything Grandma left you just trying to defend it. We'll file motions, demand depositions, challenge every clause and every witness. He was enjoying this, I realized. This wasn't just about money for him. It was about winning, about putting me in my place, about proving that even when I'd done everything right, they could still take it away. By the time it's over, Mom added, her voice returning to that sweet, poisonous tone she uses when she wants something, there won't be anything left worth fighting for. Legal fees will eat through that inheritance faster than you can imagine. And we have resources, Michael. We can afford to fight this. Can you? It was a threat, wrapped in a question, a promise that they'd burn everything to ashes before they'd let me keep what Grandma had wanted me to have. The room went quiet. The heating system hummed. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. They stared at me across that polished table with their lawyers and their papers and their absolute certainty that I'd fold, that I'd sign, that I'd give up, because that's what I'd always done before. Backed down, compromised, been the reasonable one who kept the peace, because family mattered more than being right. They were waiting for me to crumble, to realize I was outnumbered and outgunned, to understand that fighting them would cost more than surrendering. I smiled. It felt strange on my face, unfamiliar, but it felt good. Funny, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket for my phone. I brought someone too. Mom's face flickered, confusion, then concern, then something that might have been fear, as I typed out a single word and hit send. Now. We all heard it at the same time. Footsteps on the front porch, confident and unhurried. The doorbell didn't ring. Whoever was out there knew they were expected and had been given instructions. The door opened and a woman walked into the dining room like she owned it, or at least owned the air of authority that made Mom's dining room suddenly feel like her stage. She was maybe mid-50s, gray suit that looked like it cost more than both of the Morrison and Associates lawyers' suits combined, carrying a leather briefcase that had the weight and presence of a weapon, her eyes sharp and assessing as they swept the room, cataloging faces and papers and power dynamics in about 3 seconds. "This is Patricia Nguyen," I said, and I let my smile widen just a little. Estate litigation specialist, ranked top 5 in Illinois for will contests and probate disputes. I believe you might have heard of her. I knew they had because Patricia Nguyen had a reputation in legal circles. She didn't take cases she couldn't win, she didn't negotiate when she could dominate, and she cost roughly $850 an hour, which was why I'd been willing to pay her retainer fee of $25,000 out of the inheritance specifically for this moment. Mom's face went white. Actually white, the color draining like someone had pulled a plug. Derek's smirk died completely, replaced by something that looked like a person who'd just realized they'd walked into a trap. The Morrison and Associates lawyers exchanged a glance that confirmed they absolutely knew who Patricia Nguyen was, and that they'd just lost whatever advantage they'd thought they had. Patricia set her briefcase on the table with a heavy thunk that sounded like a gavel coming down. She didn't sit, didn't smile. Just opened the briefcase with the kind of deliberate calm that made it clear she was going to enjoy what came next. "Before we begin," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the room unconsciously straighten, "let me address the medical records you mentioned regarding Mrs. Eleanor Chen's supposed diminished capacity." She pulled out a folder, not a thin one, but a thick accordion file that suggested months of preparation. She slid it across the table to the first Morrison and Associates lawyer, who picked it up with hands that weren't quite steady. "Psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Raymond Patel on November 15, 2023, 2 months before Mrs. Chen's death. Complete cognitive assessment including mini mental state examination, where she scored 29 out of 30. The evaluating physician noted in his summary that her mind was, and I quote, exceptionally sharp for her age, with no signs of dementia, confusion, or impaired judgment. Dr. Patel will testify to this if needed. He's already agreed." The lawyer's face went slack as he flipped through the pages, seeing his entire argument disintegrate in real time. "She had this evaluation done," I said, and my voice came out stronger than before. Steadier, because I was realizing that Grandma Eleanor had known, had absolutely known, that this day would come, and she'd prepared for it, had left me not just money, but ammunition. "She knew you'd try this. She told me you would. She said, 'They'll come for it, Michael, they always do, but you make sure they don't get a penny.'" Patricia wasn't finished. She pulled out another document, this one in a clear, protective sleeve like it was evidence in a trial, which I suppose it was. "Next, the claim of undue influence, the suggestion that Mr. Chen somehow manipulated his grandmother into changing her will. Mrs. Chen anticipated this argument as well. She held up what looked like a USB drive. Mrs. Chen recorded a video statement with her attorney, Marcus Webb, on December 3, 2023. In this video, she explains in detail, while clearly of sound mind, why she chose to leave her entire estate to Michael. She specifically names you, Rita Chen, and you, Derek Chen, as individuals she deliberately excluded from her will. She explains her reasoning. Would you like me to play it? Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. That's not, she couldn't. The words came out fragmented, disbelieving, because Mom had apparently convinced herself that Grandma's decision had been a mistake or a manipulation rather than a clear-eyed judgment of who deserved what. She did, Patricia said simply. She was very thorough, very specific, very angry actually, about years of what she termed financial abuse and emotional neglect. Her words, not mine. I have the full transcript if you'd prefer to read rather than watch. The offer hung in the air like a dare. Silence filled the room, thick, suffocating silence, where the heating system's hum sounded loud and everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Derek shifted in his seat, uncrossed his legs, recrossed them the other way. This is bullshit, he said, but the word came out weak, defensive rather than aggressive. We're still contesting the will. You can't stop us. We have rights. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey that didn't realize it was already caught. Please do contest it. I encourage you to. Discovery will be absolutely fascinating. She pulled out a third folder, this one even thicker than the first. Because if you contest this will, if you force this into probate court and demand a full investigation into Mrs. Brake, Eleanor Chen's final wishes and the family dynamics that led to those wishes, we will subpoena everything. And I mean everything. She opened the folder and started pulling out documents like she was dealing cards in a game she'd already won. We'll subpoena your phone records, Rita Chen. All of them, including the 15 documented times over the past 5 years that you called your mother asking for money. We'll present text messages to the court, messages where you called her selfish and cruel for refusing to fund your kitchen renovation in 2021. Messages where you said, and I'm quoting directly here, "What's the point of you having money if you won't help your own daughter?" We'll let a judge read those. Mom's face had gone from white to red, blotches appearing on her cheeks like stains spreading. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Patricia moved to the next stack of papers. And Derek Chen, we'll pull your complete credit history and financial records, including the promissory note you signed on August 12, 2019, when you borrowed $30,000 from your grandmother for what you claimed was a business investment. A loan you never repaid. A loan you apparently forgot about entirely until we started investigating the estate. She slid a copy of the promissory note across the table. Derek's signature was clearly visible at the bottom, as was Grandma's shaky handwriting noting the date and amount. Derek's smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked like panic, poorly disguised as indignation. That was a family loan. There was no timeline for repayment. There was, Patricia interrupted, tapping the document. Repayment terms clearly stated, full amount due within 3 years or upon gainful employment exceeding $75,000 annually, whichever came first. You've been employed as a financial consultant making over $100,000 for the past 2 years. The loan is in default. We'll be filing a separate claim against your portion of any potential inheritance to recover that debt plus interest. Current amount owed, $38,750. The room seemed to shrink. Mom and Derek looked at each other, then at their lawyers, who were both staring at the papers in front of them like the papers had betrayed them. Patricia pulled out yet another document. We'll also depose the hospice nurses who cared for Mrs. Chen during her final months. All 4 of them have agreed to testify. They kept detailed notes, as hospice workers are required to do, documenting every visitor, every phone call, every interaction. Those notes show that Michael Chen visited an average of 4 times per week during the final year of Mrs. Chen's life, that he was present for 47 of her 52 chemotherapy appointments, that he spent 19 nights sleeping in a chair beside her bed during her final month. Patricia looked up from the papers, her eyes moving from Mom to Derek with surgical precision. Those same notes show that Rita Chen visited 3 times in the final year. Derek Chen visited twice, once for Christmas, once for her birthday, both visits lasting under 30 minutes. The nurses noted, and I'm quoting their logs here, family members appeared uncomfortable and left quickly. The Morrison and Associates lawyers had started quietly packing their briefcases. The first one cleared his throat, which sounded loud in the silence. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Chen, I think perhaps we should discuss our options privately. Maybe we should— What options? Derek hissed, his voice breaking on the second word. What the hell are our options here? Very few, Patricia said, and her voice was almost gentle now, the gentleness of someone delivering news of a terminal diagnosis. None of them good. You can proceed with contesting the will, in which case everything I just described becomes public record. Court documents are accessible to anyone. The local newspaper covers probate disputes involving large estates, your financial troubles, your debts, your neglect of your mother. It all becomes a matter of public documentation. She paused. Let that sink in. Or you can accept that Eleanor Chen made her decision with full mental capacity. with extensive documentation supporting that decision, and with very good reasons for excluding you from her will. You can walk away. Quietly. Today. Mom was staring at me now, her eyes wet, but whether from tears or rage, I couldn't tell and didn't care. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice shaking. "You're destroying this family, over money. You're choosing money over your own mother, your own brother." "No," I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how final. "I'm choosing to respect Grandma's wishes. You're the ones who showed up here with lawyers trying to overturn a legal will because you don't like what it says. You're the ones threatening court battles and trying to manipulate me into signing away what she wanted me to have. I'm just making sure she gets what she wanted, even though she's not here to fight for it herself." The truth of it seemed to hit the room like a physical force. I stood up. I hadn't sat down this entire time, I realized. Had been standing by the door like I was ready to leave or ready to fight, and it turned out I'd been ready for both. Patricia closed her briefcase with a decisive click and picked it up. "Mr. Chen," she said to me, "I believe we're finished here, unless anyone would like to continue this discussion." The Morrison and Associates lawyers were already standing, briefcases in hand, clearly desperate to exit a situation that had gone from sure win to certain disaster. The first one addressed Mom and Derek without meeting their eyes. "We'll be in touch about billing. As for the will contest, I'd strongly advise against proceeding. The documentation Mrs. Kram Nguyen has presented creates substantial obstacles to any challenge." "Obstacles?" Derek said, his voice rising. "They're bluffing. They have to be." "We're not," Patricia said simply. "Every document I showed you is filed, notarized, and ready to be submitted to court. Every witness I mentioned has signed statements. The video is time-stamped and verified. This isn't a bluff, Mr. Chen. This is the reality you created by neglecting your mother and then trying to profit from her death." The words were brutal, clinical, accurate. No one contradicted her. Mom looked at me one more time, and in her eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger or disappointment or even hatred, but the realization that I was no longer the child she could order around, the accommodating youngest son who kept peace at any cost. "You've changed," she said, and it sounded like an accusation. "She changed you, made you cold." "No," I said quietly. "She showed me the difference between family that shows up and family that shows up wanting something. There's a difference. Grandma knew it. Now I do too." I walked toward the door, Patricia beside me, our footsteps echoing on Mom's perfect hardwood floors. At the threshold, I stopped and turned back one last time. Grandma told me something the night before she died. We were sitting in her room, just the two of us. She was so weak she could barely talk, but she grabbed my hand and said, "They'll come for it, Michael. They always do. They'll bring lawyers and papers and guilt. But you make sure they don't get a penny. You earned it. You were there. They weren't. Don't you dare let them make you feel bad for accepting what I want you to have." The dining room was completely silent. Even the clock seemed to have stopped ticking. I looked at my mother, at my brother, at the lawyers who'd come to help them steal from a dead woman who'd had the audacity to choose differently than they'd wanted. "So consider it done, Grandma," I said to the air, to her memory, to the woman who'd taught me piano when I was 6 and made me hot chocolate when I was sad and held my hand when she was dying. They didn't get a penny, and they never will. Patricia and I walked out together, leaving them sitting in that too-warm dining room with their worthless papers and their empty threats, and the dawning realization that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who ends up with all the power. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded, to my ears, exactly like justice.